As the situation in the Gulf is escalating beyond a point of return, the effects of the conflict are seen beyond the Middle East. To talk about the latest and the far-reaching effects of the storm in the Gulf, I'm joined by Joshua Burgin, founder of Alliance for Global Security. Good evening. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure as always. So President Donald Trump said there would be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. He also continued, quote, "We and many of our wonderful and very brave allies and partners will work tirelessly to bring Iran back from the brink of destruction." This all sounds quite optimistic, but what plan do you think Donald Trump has for Iran?
Well, it's clear that the president gave them an ultimatum, negotiated, laid down a line on taking advantage or attacking their citizens, and when they crossed it, he ultimately took an action. This is going to have far-reaching repercussions, remaking the Middle East, remaking the world in some senses, as most acknowledge that what's happening there has more to do with China and perhaps even Russia than even Iran itself. Whether the president has a plan for what happens once the action is done, that remains to be seen. I think the general mode is that looking for people within Iran to take up the reins and lead.
We also heard from Pete Hegseth, who said, quote, "The president has a heck of a say in who runs Iran." Do you have any suggestions of who could possibly President Donald Trump be eyeing for that position?
Well, I certainly think the legacy family that looks to return has some stake in this, in an interim role. No doubt the administration has tools in its arsenal, both in terms of intelligence apparatus, other relationships that have been built through U.S. programming for many years, even diaspora living in the United States. There's many diaspora in the United States who have Persian, Iranian backgrounds that carry language, cultural skills, and can move into that space and provide a future round of leadership for the country. And I suspect there's homegrown as well. The administration doesn't need to solve these problems today.
Meanwhile, according to a report by the Washington Post, Russia is actually providing Iran with targeting information to attack American forces in the Middle East. Do you think that this is the only extent Russia is willing to go in that conflict, or are we going to see more perhaps?
Well, I think we're watching both the Iranian leadership, much of which doesn't exist anymore, as well as Russian leadership, and to a lesser extent the Chinese, looking at this as existential. Russia has been in an ongoing war with Ukraine, highly dependent on Iran, and frankly speaking, it would shock me if they weren't providing targeting information. What Russia stands to lose by lack of access to Shahed drones, they don't need the energy and oil as much as China does, but there's resources that have enabled them to project power throughout the region that's been offered by Iran, and that looks to be off the table for them for the foreseeable future. Not surprising at all. If we take this a step further, there is not a shadow of a doubt in my mind that there's an existential contest for which mode of leadership is going to rule the world and foreign affairs over the next 100 years. The Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, and the North Koreans line up on one side and have increasingly collaborated like we haven't seen since World War II, and the rest of the messy family of democracies with all their varying political processes, structures, traditions, and norms that have to then agree. The United States continues to be the world's largest single economy and single military, and to that end, it does, just by the very right of that, have a larger stake in the game and the outcomes.
So I mentioned previously here that we know that President Trump said that there will be no deal with Iran, but apart from unconditional surrender. Meanwhile, we also heard from Russia's Alexander Dugin, who said if Iran falls, Russia is next. Is Russia next then?
There's nothing that I have seen or heard over the past years that caused me to think that anybody in the West, either in Europe or the United States, want to see Russia doomed in the same way as Iran. But Russia continues to provoke the world in what I think to be very negative and bad ways. It has surprised me, actually, that Europe, who has consistently talked about strategic autonomy, has not placed 50,000 troops on a rotating basis, 200,000 in total, fighting side by side with their Ukrainian brothers, solving logistical problems, infrastructure problems, transportation problems, manufacturing problems along the way, while gaining a meaningful military, a meaningfully experienced military, And I frankly think that European leadership could have been saying along the way, Russia will decide if you remain intact once this is over. No one has ever done anything that suggests that, and I've never heard a credible voice in Washington saying that they want to see Russia broken up. But I do suspect that if we continue down the road that Russia's going, and they refuse to take an olive branch, at some point it may well be as Dugin is suggesting.
Ukraine is involved with Hungary in a spat over the oil deliveries via the Druzhba pipeline, with reports of Ukrainian bankers having been detained and then released. Do you think that this situation will play in Ukraine's favor, or perhaps it'll hinder its efforts, especially when we look at a broader picture of having that 90 billion euro loan that is still being blocked by Hungary, and a multitude, actually, of other factors?
Well, we've all been following that news overnight. Clearly, Orban is playing for his own political life. He's been in power now for the better part of 2 decades. It looks like the Hungarians are looking for new leadership, and he is playing for keeps because he knows that his job is on the line. I think that the money involved, while it's $80 million, can't be sneezed at. I frankly think this is a bit of a sideshow. Yes, Ukraine has been arm wrestling with Hungary to join with their fellow European nations and relying on energy sources elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Russian administration, through the Kenyan embassy, released a video over the Christmas holidays in which Ded Moroz Putin was handing favorable energy contracts to Orban. As I pointed to earlier, there's an existential contest taking place around the world. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and subsidiaries. And unfortunately, Orban has chosen to line up on that side. Does that mean that he's lined up fully, that Hungary is not part of the European Union? Absolutely not. The Hungarians themselves have things to say, and I think are preparing to make their voice heard on his leadership. But I do think it's troubling that a key president in Europe continues to play games with Russia, and frankly is enabling Russia with propaganda. I mean, the whole outcome this morning with the film of the back of the van, the gold bars, the money. This is clearly made for television propaganda that's aligned around his presidential campaign, and the Russians are sparing no opportunity to exploit it.
How does it reflect on the U.S. and Donald Trump, President Donald Trump in particular, the fact that he's supporting Orban ahead of the April elections? Meanwhile, we have Moscow also supporting Viktor Orban. You mentioned this existential crisis. How does this play into the full picture?
So I knew you were going to ask this question, and it's a fair one. It's even a good one.
Thank you.
Nation states must be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. And certainly this administration has interests around traditional values, around immigration, around other topics that go beyond pure security. And I suspect that's as much at play around Orban as anything else. I don't know what's in the head of the administration exactly. I cannot predict or say, but I suspect it falls more along the notion of some of the other issues that exist on the table within Europe than merely the security questions. I think Orban is making it increasingly difficult for probably the White House to maintain that degree of support, whether overt or implied. And to that end, it would be, in my view, in Orban's interest to come in line with the rest of Europe, as opposed to continuing to play footsie with Russia on these topic areas. Where Orban stands in terms of traditional conservative values, in sort of family sizes, etc. These are other matters that I don't think at the end of the day have as much legs as he might think they do.
We also heard over the last few days that the trilateral peace talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the U.S. are on hold due to the war between Washington and Tehran. Do you think we are actually running a risk of Donald Trump's desire to finish this conflict to finish this war between Ukraine and Russia quickly, regardless of possible outcomes? Do you think that Ukraine could be actually facing that danger?
From where I stand, no. I'm sure some voices would say otherwise. Ukraine has consistently held up against a country that was supposed to roll over it in the space of 3 days to 3 weeks. I don't see Ukraine backing down from its demands. We've seen headlines in the last days of the U.S. looking to Ukraine's expertise on drones to counter some of the things that they're facing in Iran. Ukraine has, with the price of blood, earned credibility and earned experience with their drone technologies that the rest of the world would do well to seek their guidance from. Far too many Western contractors looking at big dollar payouts where Ukraine has real cards to play. I don't think there's any question around this. And I think because of the cards it has to play, the idea that the administration is seeking to use Iran or other activities to jam through an end of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, I don't think it's realistic. I think there's much more to play out there, and I personally have not seen the end of the war between Russia and Ukraine for at least another year to 18 months.
In fact, Washington actually spoke to Kyiv about a possibility of using the anti-drone technology, considering the conflict in the Middle East. So we will be seeing definitely more discussion in days and weeks to come. Joshua, thank you so much for joining me on World News Tonight. Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me tonight.
That was Joshua Burgin, founder of Alliance for Global Security. And so this would be all the latest news for now. Thank you for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features. But until then, good night.